The ranch house smelled exactly as I remembered. Leather and pine and decades of memories soaked into every wooden beam. 3 days after we buried Grandpa Harold, I still expected to hear his voice calling from the kitchen, still expected to see him sitting in his worn armchair by the window, where he used to watch the sun set over the pastures he had bought with 40 years of Navy pay. I arrived alone, wearing simple jeans and a black sweater. No uniform, no insignia. Just a granddaughter still raw with grief, still feeling the weight of his hand in mine during those final hours when I promised him I would take care of everything. The living room was already full when I walked in. Aunt Victoria had positioned herself in Grandpa's armchair like a queen holding court, dabbing at dry eyes with a handkerchief she probably bought specifically for this performance. My father Randall stood near the window, avoiding eye contact with everyone. His wife Brenda examined the antique clock on the mantel, probably calculating its value. And my cousin Marcus lounged against the doorframe with that smirk he had worn since childhood, the one that always preceded something cruel. Nobody greeted me. Nobody offered condolences. The room was thick with anticipation of a different kind. "Now that everyone is finally here," Victoria announced, shooting me a pointed look, "we can proceed with the reading of Harold's will." I found a spot near the wall, beneath Grandpa's naval portrait. He stood in his dress whites, young and proud, the same photograph he had shown me when I was 8 years old and asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. He had laughed and said he already was what he wanted to be, a sailor, a man who served something greater than himself. Victoria produced a document from her designer handbag with theatrical flourish. "I found this in Harold's desk last week, his final wishes." She paused for effect. "I know this may come as a surprise to some, but Harold left very specific instructions." She began reading. The will named her as the sole beneficiary of the ranch, the savings, everything Harold had built over 4 decades of service. Every deployment, every sacrifice, every penny he had earned defending this country, now supposedly belonging to a woman who could not be bothered to visit him once during his final months in the hospital. That's not his signature. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Everyone turned to look at me. Victoria's expression flickered. The grieving sister act vanished for just a moment, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Excuse me. I have letters from him, dozens of them sent to me during every deployment. I know his handwriting." I kept my voice steady, the way I had learned to do during crisis situations at sea. "I know him." The room went silent. Then Victoria laughed, a sharp sound that cut through the dusty air. "Oh, this is rich. The nobody sailor thinks she knows something about my father." She rose from the armchair, her voice rising with her. "You abandoned him, Ileana. You left for your little boat trips while I stayed here, while I handled everything. You never visited him in the hospital, not once." Victoria's face twisted with sudden venom. "You don't deserve a single acre of his land. You're a nobody who plays dress-up on ships while real family takes care of real responsibilities. You only came around at the end because you wanted in the will." Marcus laughed from the doorway. "Look at Sailor Girl thinking she's somebody. What, you gonna swab the deck of the ranch now?" I looked at my father. Randall stared at the floor, saying nothing, defending nothing, just as he had done my entire life. "Dad," I said quietly. He shifted his weight and examined his shoes more intently. "You see," Victoria's voice dripped with satisfaction, "even your own father knows the truth. You're nothing, Ileana. You've always been nothing. And you'll sign these papers relinquishing any claim to this property, or I'll make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you really are." I turned away from her words, from the laughter, from my father's cowardice. My eyes found Grandpa's portrait again, his steady gaze, his quiet dignity, the medals on his chest that represented a lifetime of service this family never understood. He saw me when no one else would look. The thought anchored me, kept my voice from breaking, kept my hands from trembling. Grandpa had always seen me. Through every accomplishment they dismissed, every milestone they ignored, he had seen exactly who I was becoming. And they had no idea who that was. Standing there in that room full of people who shared my blood but had never once shared my pride, I found myself drifting back through the years. The memories came unbidden, washing over me like waves against a ship's hull. Each one a reminder of the two lives I had lived, the one my family imagined and the one I had actually built. I was 8 years old the first time Grandpa Harold put me on a horse. My father had driven me to the ranch for what he called a quick visit, already impatient to leave before we had even arrived. He sat in his car, engine running, while Grandpa took my hand and led me to the stables. "Your daddy's in a hurry," Grandpa said, not unkindly. "But some things can't be rushed, Ellie. Horses, sunsets, becoming who you're meant to be." He lifted me onto a gentle mare named Sailor, which made him smile every time he said her name. For an hour, he walked beside me, teaching me how to hold the reins, how to move with the horse instead of against her. My father honked the horn twice before finally driving away, leaving me at the ranch for the weekend. "He'll come back for me, right?" I asked Grandpa that night. "He will." Grandpa stirred the fire and looked at me with those steady blue eyes. "But if he forgets, you'll always have a home here. You've got Sailor's blood, little one, just like me." My father did come back, eventually, 2 days late and full of excuses, but I never forgot that weekend. And I never forgot what Grandpa had said about who I was meant to become. By the time I was 12, the pattern had been set. My father's visits to his own father grew shorter and more reluctant. Victoria would call occasionally, usually wanting something. Money for Marcus's school, a loan that was never repaid. Updates on Harold's health that she could report to friends as evidence of her devotion. But I came back every summer, every Christmas I could manage. And on my 12th birthday, Grandpa gave me a gift that I still carry today. It was his old Navy compass, the one he had carried through 3 deployments and halfway around the world. The brass was worn smooth from decades of his hands holding it, and when I opened the lid, I found an inscription I had never noticed before. "True north is not on any map," I read aloud. "It's in your heart." Grandpa nodded slowly. "My commanding officer gave me that compass when I made Chief Petty Officer. I've been saving it for someone who would understand what it means." He closed my fingers around it. "You've got Sailor's blood, Ellie. Don't let anyone tell you different." That compass went with me to Annapolis 6 years later. The day I received my appointment to the Naval Academy, I called my father first. It was the proper thing to do, the respectful thing. I waited by the phone in my dorm room, heart pounding with excitement, ready to share the greatest achievement of my young life. "The Navy," his voice was flat, disappointed. "Ileana, we talked about this. Your aunt can get you a job at her husband's company, a real career." "This is a real career, Dad. This is the Naval Academy. It's one of the most prestigious." "It's a phase. You'll grow out of it." I heard Brenda saying something in the background, and my father sighed. "Look, I have to go. We'll talk about this later." He hung up. We never talked about it later. But Grandpa drove 400 miles to take me to Annapolis himself. He wore his old dress uniform, still pristine after all those years, and stood at attention when I walked through those gates for the first time. He saluted me, and I saw tears streaming down his weathered face. "Your grandmother would be so proud," he said. "I'm proud enough for both of us, Ellie." My father never visited me at Annapolis, not once in 4 years. He missed my graduation, claiming a work conflict that I later learned was a golf trip with clients. Victoria sent a card with a check for $50 and a note that said, "Hope you got this out of your system." But Grandpa was there, front row, cheering louder than any other family member in that auditorium when I received my commission as an ensign in the United States Navy. He was 73 years old, and he stood for the entire ceremony because he said a sailor never sits when another sailor earns their stripes. The years that followed blurred together in a cascade of deployments, promotions, and achievements that my family treated as footnotes in a life they considered wasted. I made lieutenant while stationed aboard the USS Nimitz. My father found out 6 months later and asked if that meant I was almost done with this Navy thing. I qualified as a surface warfare officer and earned my gold badge during a deployment to the Persian Gulf. Victoria sent a birthday card that year addressed to our little sailor girl, as if I were still playing dress-up instead of commanding damage control teams during a shipboard fire that could have killed dozens. That fire, I never told my family about it, never described the moment the alarm sounded, the smoke pouring through the corridors, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death for the sailors under my command. We saved 19 people that night. I earned a commendation for valor. My commanding officer shook my hand and told me I had the makings of someone who would go far in the Navy. My father called me that week to complain about the price of his new car. But Grandpa knew. Grandpa always knew. He kept a scrapbook of every Navy Times article that mentioned my name, every newsletter from my ship, every photo I sent from ports around the world. When I called him from the satellite phone aboard the USS Fitzgerald after taking command of my first destroyer, he wept with joy. "My commander," he said through his tears. "That's what I'm going to call you from now on, my commander." His letters arrived at every port, handwritten on ranch stationery, always addressed to Commander Ileana Mercer, even before I officially held that rank. He wrote about the horses and the sunsets, and how the ranch was waiting for me whenever I needed a place to call home. He asked about my crew, my missions, my dreams for the future. He was the only one who ever asked. I was stationed in Japan when I received the call about his diagnosis. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer. 6 months, maybe less. I requested emergency leave within the hour and was on a plane within 12. For the next 3 months, I made the trip between San Diego and Texas 14 times. Every leave I could get, every weekend I could spare, I spent at that ranch house, holding his hand, listening to his stories, making sure he knew he wasn't alone. Victoria visited twice. The first time, she stayed for 20 minutes and spent most of it asking about the will. The second time, she brought Marcus, who complained about the lack of cell phone service and left after an hour. My father came once for an afternoon. He sat awkwardly in the corner of Grandpa's hospital room, checked his watch 11 times, and left before dinner. He told me I should wrap things up with Grandpa soon because I was neglecting my responsibilities to take care of a dying man. Grandpa heard him say it. I saw the pain flash across his face, quickly masked by a lifetime of discipline. But that night, after my father was gone, Grandpa called me to his bedside and took my hand. "Don't let them take what you've earned, Ellie." His voice was weak, but his grip was strong. "Not even family, especially not family, promise me." "I promise, Grandpa." He squeezed my hand and smiled the same smile I remembered from that first day on horseback. "You've got sailor's blood, never forget it." He died 3 weeks later, with my hand in his and his compass against his heart. And now I stood in his living room while his portrait watched over me, listening to the same family that had abandoned him fight over the legacy they had never understood. Victoria's voice droned on about legal procedures and proper channels. Marcus made another joke at my expense. My father continued his careful study of the floorboards. None of them knew what I had become. None of them had ever bothered to ask. They saw a nobody sailor playing dress-up on ships. They didn't see the commander who had led humanitarian operations after a Pacific typhoon, coordinating supply drops that saved 4 villages from starvation. They didn't see the officer who received the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for pulling a junior sailor from the wreckage of a helicopter crash on the flight deck of the Fitzgerald. They didn't see the woman who had commanded a destroyer through hostile waters, who had earned the respect of every sailor under her command, who had carried her grandfather's compass through every challenge because true north was in her heart. They had no idea, and until this moment I had never needed them to know. But Grandpa's legacy was at stake now. Everything he had built with 40 years of service, every sunrise he had earned, every fence post he had driven into this land, every memory he had made in this house that still smelled like leather and pine. I could not let Victoria take that. I would not. Victoria thrust a stack of papers toward me, her manicured nails tapping impatiently against the documents. "Sign these. Now, relinquish your claim to the estate and we can all move on with our lives." Marcus stepped away from the doorframe and positioned himself between me and the front entrance. His arms crossed over his chest in what he probably thought was an intimidating posture. I had faced down pirates in the Strait of Malacca. I had stood on the bridge of a destroyer during a typhoon that sent 30-foot waves crashing over the bow. A 30-year-old failed businessman blocking a doorway was not going to intimidate me. Ileana, Victoria's voice took on a sickly sweet tone that barely masked the venom underneath. Let's be reasonable about this. You have your little Navy career. You don't need this ranch. You're never here anyway. I'm the one who stayed close to Daddy. I'm the one who should have inherited everything. You never visited him in the hospital, I said quietly. Not once in 3 months. I was busy. I have responsibilities, a life. She waved her hand dismissively. Unlike some people, I can't just drop everything to play nurse. I took emergency leave from commanding a destroyer. I flew 14,000 miles, 14 times to be with him. Victoria's expression flickered with annoyance. Always the martyr, aren't you? Always trying to make the rest of us look bad. She stepped closer, lowering her voice to something between a hiss and a whisper. Sign the papers, Ileana, or I will make sure everyone in this town knows exactly what kind of person you really are. A gold digger who swooped in at the end to manipulate a dying old man. I felt something shift inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, more focused. The same clarity that had descended during that shipboard fire, when the smoke was so thick I could barely see my own hands and 19 lives depended on my next decision. You're threatening me, I said, my voice flat and calm. I'm giving you an opportunity to walk away with some dignity. Victoria smiled, but there was nothing warm in it. Take it, because if you fight me on this, I will destroy you. I have lawyers. I have connections in this town. What do you have? A uniform and some stories about boats. Part of me wanted to walk away. I had spent my entire adult life avoiding family drama, staying above the petty conflicts that seemed to consume everyone around me. The Navy had taught me to pick my battles, to conserve energy for fights that actually mattered. I could walk out that door, return to my ship, and let Victoria have this place that held so many memories of the only family member who had ever truly loved me. But then I looked at the folded flag on the mantel. Grandpa's flag, presented by the honor guard at his funeral 3 days ago. 13 folds, each one representing something sacred. Faith, hope, honor, the tribute that a grateful nation pays to those who served. Victoria wanted to take everything he had built. Every acre of land purchased with deployment pay. Every fence post driven into the ground during shore leave. Every improvement made with the careful savings of a man who never spent money on himself, because he was always thinking about the future, about legacy, about leaving something behind for someone who would understand its value. She wanted to take his flag and sell the house that held it. I remembered Grandpa's words from that final night. His grip on my hand, weak but determined. His eyes, still sharp despite the pain medication, looking into mine with an intensity I would never forget. Don't let them take what you've earned, Ellie. Not even family. This wasn't about the money. It had never been about the money. It was about honoring the man who had seen me when no one else would look. The man who had driven 400 miles to watch me walk through the gates of Annapolis. The man who had kept a scrapbook of my achievements when my own father couldn't be bothered to remember my rank. I would not let his legacy be stolen by people who had never understood him. No. The word hung in the air between us. Simple, final. Victoria blinked. Excuse me. I said no. I met her gaze steadily, drawing on every ounce of command presence I had developed over 15 years of naval service. I will not sign those papers, and I will not be threatened by you. Her face contorted with barely contained rage. You ungrateful little. There's another will, I said, cutting her off. The real one. The room went completely silent. Even Marcus stopped his theatrical door blocking to stare at me. What are you talking about? Victoria's voice had lost some of its confidence. Grandpa didn't trust the family to handle his estate fairly. He told me as much during those final weeks. He knew exactly what you would try to do, Victoria. He knew you would show up with lawyers and fake documents the moment he was gone. I reached into my pocket and touched the compass, drawing strength from its familiar weight. So he made arrangements, legal arrangements, with people who couldn't be bought or intimidated. "You're bluffing," but there was uncertainty in her eyes now. "His will was filed with a Navy JAG lawyer 6 months ago, properly witnessed, properly notarized, registered with the state." I paused, watching her face pale by degrees. "Whatever document you found in his desk was not his final will. He made sure of that." Victoria sputtered, searching for words. My father looked up from the floor for the first time in minutes, confusion evident on his face. Marcus glanced toward the door as if calculating whether he should still be blocking it. "You're lying," Victoria finally managed. "You're making this up because you know you've lost." I walked to the window and looked out at the land Grandpa had loved. The pastures stretching toward the horizon. The barn where he had taught me to ride. The fence line he had walked every morning until his body wouldn't let him anymore. "The JAG officer's name is Lieutenant Commander James Whitmore," I said without turning around. "He's on his way here now. He received notification of Grandpa's death through official Navy channels and has been coordinating with the base in San Diego to ensure everything is handled properly." "You can't do this," Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek. "This is my inheritance, my father's land. You have no right." Grandpa had the right to leave his property to whoever he chose. I turned to face her, and something in my expression made her take a step backward. "And he chose. You're about to find out exactly what that choice was." My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out and glanced at the screen. The message was brief, arriving in 10 minutes. "Formation is ready." I allowed myself one small moment of satisfaction before slipping the phone back into my pocket. Then I looked at Victoria, at Marcus, at my father who still couldn't meet my eyes. "You might want to sit down," I said calmly. "This is going to take a while." The next 10 minutes stretched like hours. Victoria paced the living room like a caged animal, alternating between threats and desperate attempts at negotiation. She offered to split the estate. She promised to be reasonable. She swore that she had always loved her father and that this was all a misunderstanding that could be worked out between family members without involving outsiders. I said nothing. I simply stood by the window and watched the road that led to the ranch, waiting for what I knew was coming. Marcus had abandoned his position by the door and was now sitting on the arm of the couch, scrolling through his phone with increasing agitation. Every few seconds he would glance up at me, then at his mother, then back at his phone. Whatever confidence he had possessed earlier was rapidly evaporating. My father had retreated to a corner of the room, as far from the conflict as he could get while still remaining inside. Brenda stood beside him, whispering urgently in his ear, probably calculating how this development would affect whatever inheritance she had been counting on. "This is ridiculous," Victoria announced for the 3rd time. "Some Navy lawyer is going to come in here and try to overturn a legitimate will. That's not how the law works. I'll have my attorneys here within the hour. We'll see who has the real legal authority." I didn't bother to respond. Through the window, I could see the first vehicle approaching on the long dirt road that led to the ranch. A black SUV with government plates, moving at a steady, unhurried pace. Behind it, I could make out a second vehicle, then a third. "What is that?" Victoria moved toward the window, craning her neck to see. "Who's coming?" "The people who are going to read Grandpa's actual will," I said simply. The first SUV pulled into the circular drive in front of the house and came to a stop. A man in a crisp navy dress uniform emerged from the passenger side. Even from this distance, I could see the gold oak leaves on his collar. Lieutenant Commander James Whitmore, Navy JAG Corps, carrying a leather briefcase that I knew contained documents that would change everything. "That's a military uniform," Marcus said, stating the obvious. "Why is there military here?" Victoria's voice had gone slightly shrill. "This is private property. They can't just show up here without permission. Randall, call the police." My father made no move toward his phone. For once in his life, he seemed to sense that forces were at work that he didn't understand and couldn't control. I walked to the front door and opened it before Lieutenant Commander Whitmore could knock. He was younger than I expected, perhaps 35, with the precise bearing of someone who had spent his career ensuring that regulations were followed to the letter. Behind him, I could see other figures emerging from the vehicles. More uniforms, more official-looking personnel. "Commander Mercer." Whitmore snapped a crisp salute as he addressed me. "Lieutenant Commander James Whitmore, Navy JAG Corps. We spoke on the phone." I returned the salute automatically, muscle memory taking over. "Lieutenant Commander, thank you for coming." "It's an honor, ma'am." His voice carried clearly into the house, and I saw Victoria freeze at the word commander. The confusion on her face might have been satisfying under other circumstances. Whitmore stepped inside, his eyes sweeping the room with professional assessment. He noted Victoria's aggressive posture, Marcus's obvious discomfort, my father's attempted invisibility in the corner. Then his gaze settled on the document Victoria still clutched in her hand. "Is that the contested will?" he asked, his tone neutral but authoritative. Victoria clutched the papers tighter to her chest. "This is my father's legitimate last will and testament. I don't know who you are or why you're here, but this is a family matter that doesn't concern the Navy." Whitmore reached into his briefcase and produced a folder thick with documents. "Ma'am, I'm here as the legal representative of Captain Harold Mercer, United States Navy, retired, who filed his last will and testament with the Navy JAG Corps 6 months prior to his death. That will, properly witnessed and notarized, supersedes any other document that may have been discovered afterward." The word captain hung in the air, Victoria's brow furrowed. My father looked up sharply. Neither of them had ever known Grandpa's official rank. To them, he had always just been Harold, the old man on the ranch who talked too much about his Navy days. "Wait," Marcus said slowly, his phone forgotten in his hand. "Did you just call her commander, as in like a real commander?" Whitmore turned to regard Marcus with an expression of carefully controlled patience. "Commander Ileana Mercer is a decorated surface warfare officer with 15 years of distinguished service, including command of the destroyer USS Fitzgerald. She is the recipient of the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroism." He paused. "I would think her family would be aware of these achievements." The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the information sank in, watched as faces that had been twisted with contempt transformed into expressions of disbelief. Victoria's mouth opened and closed several times without producing sound. Marcus had gone pale. Even Brenda had stopped her whispering to stare at me as if seeing me for the first time. "That's not possible," Victoria finally managed. "She's just she works on ships. She never said anything about." "Because you never asked," I said quietly. "None of you ever asked." Through the window, I could see more activity outside. Additional vehicles had arrived, and figures in white were emerging. Dress white uniforms, immaculate and formal, the ceremonial dress of the United States Navy. They were forming up in the yard, moving with the precise coordination that only years of training could produce. Lieutenant Commander Whitmore noticed my attention and nodded slightly. "The Honor Guard requested permission to participate, ma'am. Captain Mercer served with several of the senior officers present today. They wanted to ensure his final wishes were carried out with appropriate dignity." "Honor Guard?" Victoria's voice had lost all its earlier aggression. "What Honor Guard? What is happening?" I didn't answer her. I was watching through the window as a figure emerged from one of the newly arrived vehicles. An older man in dress whites, his chest covered with ribbons and medals, his bearing unmistakably that of a flag officer. I recognized him from photographs in Grandpa's study. Rear Admiral Thomas Chen, retired, who had served with Grandpa during the Vietnam War, who had been at his promotion ceremony to captain, who had, according to Grandpa's stories, trusted him with his life more than once. Whitmore opened his briefcase again and withdrew a sealed envelope. "Before we proceed with the reading of the will, Captain Mercer left specific instructions that this letter be read aloud to all family members present." "I don't want to hear any letter," Victoria snapped, some of her defiance returning. "This is obviously some kind of setup. Ileana arranged all of this to steal my inheritance." "Ma'am, I would advise you to listen carefully." Whitmore's tone had hardened almost imperceptibly. The contents of this letter will be relevant to legal proceedings that may follow. Something in his voice made Victoria fall silent. She sank onto the couch, her fake will still clutched in her hands, watching as Whitmore broke the seal on the envelope. He began to read, and my grandfather's voice seemed to fill the room, speaking from beyond death with all the clarity and precision of the man I had loved. To my family, if you can still be called that. If you are hearing this letter, then I am gone, and Lieutenant Commander Whitmore is carrying out my final instructions. I want you to understand why I made the choices I made, and why the contents of my will should not surprise anyone who truly knew me. Whitmore paused, then continued. For 40 years I served my country. I missed birthdays and anniversaries and holidays. I spent months at sea, away from everyone I loved because I believed in duty and honor and sacrifice. I earned every penny I ever saved, and I spent those pennies building something that would last. This ranch, this land, this legacy. Victoria shifted uncomfortably on the couch. I had hoped that my children would understand what that legacy meant. I had hoped they would value the sacrifice that built it. Instead, I watched my son abandon his own family for comfort and convenience. I watched my daughter circle like a vulture, waiting for me to die so she could claim what she never earned. The words hung in the air like a judgment. My father had gone completely still in his corner. Victoria's face had flushed an ugly red. But there was one person who understood. One person who followed me into service, not because I asked, but because she felt the call of duty in her own heart. My granddaughter Ileana saw me when no one else would look. She visited me when no one else would come. She held my hand at the end, when everyone else had forgotten I was still alive. My eyes burned with unshed tears, but I kept my composure. Grandpa would have wanted me to be strong. Ellie is my legacy. She is the only one who honored our family's naval tradition. She is the only one who understood what I was trying to build. And she is the only one I trust to protect what I spent my life creating. Whitmore's lowered the letter and looked around the room. That concludes Captain Mercer's personal message, he said. We will now proceed with the formal reading of the authenticated will. Through the window, I could see the formation taking shape. 12 sailors in dress-white uniforms had arranged themselves in 2 precise rows on the gravel drive, their movements synchronized with the discipline that only comes from years of training and genuine respect for tradition. At their head stood a Navy captain in his 50s, his chest adorned with rows of ribbons. I recognized him from photographs on Grandpa's wall. Captain Robert Hendricks, who had served as a young ensign under Grandpa's command decades ago. Behind the formation, Rear Admiral Chen emerged from his vehicle. Despite his age, his bearing was ramrod straight, his white uniform immaculate in the afternoon sun. He carried himself with the quiet authority of a man who had spent decades making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Victoria was still sputtering protests. This is absurd. You can't just march onto private property with soldiers and— They're sailors, ma'am, Whitmore corrected her calmly. United States Navy. And they are here at the request of Captain Mercer's estate to ensure his final wishes are carried out with appropriate military honors. My father would never have wanted this circus, Victoria snapped. He was a simple man, a rancher. Your father served 40 years in the United States Navy. He achieved the rank of captain. He was awarded the Bronze Star for Valor and the Navy Distinguished Service Medal. Whitmore's voice had gone cold. He was not a simple rancher who happened to own horses. He was a decorated war hero who chose to spend his retirement on land he loved. The silence that followed was absolute. I watched Victoria process information that should not have been news. Grandpa had never hidden his service. He simply hadn't advertised it, and his family had never cared enough to ask. The front door opened, and Admiral Chen stepped inside. His presence seemed to fill the room, commanding attention without speaking. Commander Mercer, he addressed me first with warmth reserved for those he respected. I served with your grandfather for 6 years. He was one of the finest officers I ever knew. It was my honor to be here to ensure his wishes are fulfilled. I straightened instinctively. Admiral Chen, My grandfather spoke of you often. He said you were the best commander he ever served under." A ghost of a smile crossed the Admiral's face. Harold Mercer was the backbone of every ship he served on. His gaze swept across the room, taking in Victoria's defiance, Marcus's panic, my father's attempted invisibility. He wanted his family to understand what he had built and why. I intend to ensure that understanding occurs. Whitmore opened the official will document. With the Admiral's permission, I will now read the authenticated last will and testament of Captain Harold James Mercer, United States Navy, retired. Admiral Chen nodded, moving to stand beside me. His presence felt like a shield. Whitmore began reading. "I, Harold James Mercer, Captain, United States Navy, retired, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my final will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils." He glanced at Victoria, whose knuckles had gone white gripping the couch. "To my son, Randall Thomas Mercer, I leave the sum of $1 in recognition of decades during which he took no interest in my life, my service, or my well-being. I have loved him despite his failings, but I will not reward his neglect with the fruits of my labor." My father made a sound between a gasp and a groan. Brenda's face went completely blank. "To my daughter, Victoria Ann Mercer Langston, I leave the sum of $1 in recognition of visits made only when she wanted something and her absence during my final illness. I forgive her greed, but I will not enable it." Victoria shot to her feet. "This is fraud, elder abuse. She manipulated him while he was dying." "Ma'am, I advise you to remain silent." Whitmore's voice cracked like a whip. "This will was drafted 6 months before Captain Mercer's death, when he was in full possession of his faculties. It was witnessed by 2 naval officers and notarized by a military notary public." He paused meaningfully, looking at the crumpled document in Victoria's hand. "Furthermore, any attempt to subvert a legally executed will through fraudulent documents constitutes a serious crime. The document you are holding appears to be a forgery, and it will be entered into evidence for review by appropriate authorities." Victoria sank back onto the couch, ashen-faced. For the first time, she had nothing to say. Whitmore continued. "To my grandson, Marcus Edward Langston, I leave nothing. He has never acknowledged my existence except to mock those who chose to serve." Marcus's phone clattered to the floor. He didn't pick it up. "All remaining assets, including the property known as Mercer Ranch, all buildings, livestock, equipment, financial accounts, and personal property not otherwise specified, I leave to my granddaughter, Commander Ileana Rose Mercer, United States Navy." The words settled over the room like a benediction. Something loosened in my chest. Not triumph, relief, validation. The knowledge that Grandpa had trusted me with everything that mattered. Whitmore continued reading. "I make this bequest to Ileana because she alone has honored the legacy of service I dedicated my life to building. She followed me into the Navy not because I asked, but because she understood what it meant to serve something greater than herself. She is my true heir, in spirit and in blood." He lowered the document. "That concludes the reading of Captain Mercer's will. Commander Mercer, as sole beneficiary, you will need to sign documents to initiate asset transfer." Outside, the formation shifted. Captain Hendricks appeared in the doorway. "Admiral, the honor guard is prepared for the flag presentation, whenever you give the order." Admiral Chen looked at me with understanding. "Commander, your grandfather left specific instructions that a second ceremony be held at the ranch, in front of the family. He wanted them to see what it means to serve. He wanted them to understand what they never bothered to learn while he was alive." I nodded, not trusting my voice. The Admiral turned to the room. "You are all invited to witness this ceremony. I would strongly encourage you to attend." No one moved. "That was not a request," Admiral Chen added quietly. "Captain Mercer earned this ceremony with 40 years of service. The least you can do is stand and watch." One by one, they rose. Victoria, her face a mask of fury. Marcus, wanting to be anywhere else. My father, his eyes briefly meeting mine before sliding away. Brenda, clutching her purse like a lifeline. We walked outside into the afternoon sun. The sailors stood at perfect attention, white uniforms brilliant against the ranch's dusty browns and greens. Captain Hendricks called them to order, and they moved as one, a choreographed display of precision unchanged for generations. Two sailors stepped forward, carrying a triangular fold of fabric. Grandpa's burial flag, presented to me at his funeral, had been brought back for this moment. The stars and stripes, folded 13 times according to tradition, each fold representing something sacred. Faith, honor, the tribute of a grateful nation. Captain Hendricks spoke of Grandpa's service, his voice carrying across the silent ranch. He told stories I had never heard, about a chief petty officer who saved his ship during an engine room fire, a lieutenant commander who navigated through a typhoon to deliver supplies to a stranded destroyer, a captain who earned the respect of every sailor who served under him. He spoke of courage and sacrifice, of duty and honor, of a man who gave 40 years to his country and asked for nothing except the chance to live out his final years on land he loved. When he finished, the honor guard presented arms. The sharp crack of their salute echoed across the pastures. Then, slowly, the two sailors carrying the flag walked toward me. On behalf of the President of the United States, the Secretary of the Navy, and a grateful nation, please accept this flag as a symbol of our appreciation for your grandfather's honorable and faithful service. I reached out and took the flag, holding it against my chest the way I had been taught. The fabric was heavy with meaning, weighted with every sacrifice my grandfather had ever made. Admiral Chen stepped forward and shook my hand. "Commander Mercer is one of the finest officers I've served with," he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the yard where family and ranch hands had gathered. Harold spoke of nothing but her. He was right to be proud. He turned to face Victoria, my father, Marcus. His expression was unreadable. "You should have listened. You should have asked. You should have paid attention to the remarkable woman standing in front of you. But you were too busy counting money you hadn't earned to notice what was right in front of your eyes." Behind me, I heard Victoria make a choked sound. I didn't turn to look. This moment wasn't about her. It never had been. This moment was about a man who had served his country, built something beautiful with his own hands, and trusted me to carry it forward. This moment was about legacy. The flag ceremony had barely concluded when Victoria's composure shattered completely. Whatever restraint she had managed to maintain during the formal proceedings dissolved like morning fog under a harsh sun. She stepped forward, her heels sinking into the gravel, her finger pointing at me like a weapon. "This is not over," she hissed, her voice carrying across the yard. Several of the sailors turned to look at her, their expressions carefully neutral but their disapproval evident in the set of their shoulders. "I don't care what that document says. I don't care about your little Navy friends and their ceremonies. My father would never have cut me out of his will. Never. You did something to him. You manipulated a sick old man who didn't know what he was signing." Lieutenant Commander Whitmore stepped forward, positioning himself between Victoria and me with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to diffusing volatile situations. "Ma'am, I must advise you that continuing to make accusations of fraud and manipulation could constitute defamation. Additionally, the document you brought to this gathering appears to be a forgery. If you persist in claiming it as legitimate, you may face criminal charges including attempted fraud, forgery, and interference with an estate." Victoria's face cycled through several expressions: shock, disbelief, then a desperate kind of pleading that might have moved me if I hadn't seen her true nature laid bare over the past hour. "You don't understand. I need this ranch. I'm going through a divorce. Richard is taking everything. I have nothing left. Daddy would have wanted me to be provided for. He would have wanted his daughter to be taken care of." "You had 40 years to be a daughter to him," I said quietly, still clutching the flag against my chest. 40 years of birthdays and holidays and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. You spent them asking for money and making excuses. He noticed, Victoria. He kept track of every visit you didn't make, every phone call you couldn't be bothered to return. He knew exactly who you were. "You poisoned him against me." Victoria's voice rose to a shriek that sent birds scattering from the nearby oak tree. You came in at the end and filled his head with lies about his own daughter. You probably told him I never visited when I was here all the time. I was here more than anyone." "Ma'am," one of the ranch hands, an older man named Miguel who had worked for Grandpa for over 20 years, stepped forward. His weathered face was set in hard lines. "I've been on this property every day for 2 decades. I can count on one hand the number of times you came to see Mr. Harold, and every single time you left with a check in your purse and complaints on your lips." Several other ranch hands nodded in agreement. These were men who had known Grandpa better than his own children, who had shared coffee with him on cold mornings and helped him mend fences on hot afternoons. Their loyalty was to him, and by extension to me. Victoria looked around wildly, searching for an ally and finding none. Her gaze landed on my father, who was standing apart from everyone, his shoulders hunched as if trying to make himself invisible. "Randall, say something. She's stealing our inheritance, our father's legacy. Are you just going to stand there?" My father looked up slowly, his face a mask of conflicted emotions. For a moment, I thought I saw shame in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by the same passive acceptance that had defined his entire relationship with his sister. "There's nothing to say, Vicky. Dad made his choice. He was always closer to Ellie than to either of us. We both know that. Because she manipulated him. Because she's been planning this for years." "No," my father's voice was tired, defeated. "Because she showed up, because she called, because she actually gave a damn about him and we didn't." He glanced at me, and for one fleeting second, I saw my father as he might have been if he'd made different choices. A man capable of honesty, at least with himself. "We don't deserve that ranch, Vicky. We never did." Victoria stared at him as if he had grown a second head. Then she turned her fury on Marcus, who had been edging steadily toward the parked cars ever since the will reading concluded. "Marcus, don't just stand there, do something." My cousin froze, caught between the desire to flee and the obligation to support his mother. He chose the cowardly middle ground of words without action. "Mom, I think maybe we should just go. This is getting embarrassing." "Embarrassing," Victoria's voice cracked. "Your future is being stolen and you think it's embarrassing." "The young man is actually correct," Admiral Chen interjected, his voice carrying the weight of decades of command authority. "This has become quite embarrassing. For you." He nodded toward the sheriff's vehicle that had pulled up to the ranch entrance during the flag ceremony. "I believe the local authorities have some questions regarding the document you presented as Captain Mercer's will." 2 deputies emerged from the vehicle and approached the gathering with the unhurried pace of law enforcement officers who knew they had all the time in the world. The lead deputy, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense expression, nodded to Lieutenant Commander Whitmore. "We received your call, Commander. You said there's been an attempt at a state fraud." Whitmore handed her the crumpled document Victoria had been clutching earlier. "This will was presented as Captain Harold Mercer's last testament. It appears to be a forgery. The signature does not match Captain Mercer's known handwriting, and the notarization appears to have been falsified." Victoria's face went white. "I found that document in my father's desk. I had nothing to do with." "Ma'am, you'll have an opportunity to make a statement at the station." The deputy's voice was professionally neutral. "Right now, I need you to come with us to answer some questions." "You can't arrest me. I haven't done anything wrong." "No one said anything about arrest, ma'am. We just need to clarify some details about how you came into possession of this document and who might have created it." The deputy glanced at Marcus, who had gone very pale. "We'll need to speak with you as well, sir." Marcus looked like he might be sick. "I don't know anything about any fake will. This was all my mom's idea. I just came along because she said there was an inheritance." "Marcus," Victoria's voice was sharp with betrayal. "I'm not going to jail for you, Mom. I didn't sign anything. I didn't forge anything. This is your mess." The family I had grown up with, such as it was disintegrating before my eyes. Part of me felt a hollow satisfaction at watching them turn on each other. A larger part simply felt tired. Tired of the drama, tired of the pettiness, tired of being surrounded by people who saw family as something to exploit rather than cherish. The deputies escorted Victoria toward their vehicle. She went with them, but not quietly, protesting her innocence with every step and throwing accusations over her shoulder. Marcus followed at a distance, looking like a man walking to his own execution. When they were gone, a strange silence settled over the ranch. The sailors remained in formation, awaiting orders. The ranch hands stood in a loose cluster near the barn, uncertain what to do next. My father lingered near his car, Brenda tugging at his arm and hissing something I couldn't hear. I walked toward him, still carrying Grandpa's flag. He watched me approach with the wary expression of a man who expected to be struck. "Dad." He flinched at the word. "Ellie, I know I wasn't. I should have." He trailed off, unable to complete a sentence that would require acknowledging decades of failure. "You could have just been proud of me," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion churning beneath the surface. "That's all I ever wanted from you. Not money, not approval of my choices, just a father who was proud of his daughter's accomplishments. Was that really so hard?" He opened his mouth to respond, but Brenda cut him off. "Randall, we should go. There's nothing for us here." I looked at my stepmother, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time. I saw a woman whose only concern had ever been material comfort, who had married my father for his potential earning power and spent 2 decades disappointed by his mediocrity. She didn't love him. I doubted she was even capable of the emotion. "She's right," I said to my father. "There's nothing here for you. Grandpa made sure of that." My father's face crumpled. For one moment, I saw the little boy he must have been once, before bitterness and weakness had shaped him into the man standing before me. Then the moment passed, and he was just my father again, a stranger wearing a familiar face. "I did love him," he said quietly. "In my own way, I know it wasn't enough." "It wasn't," I agreed. "But that's between you and Grandpa now. I can't forgive you on his behalf." He nodded slowly, accepting the judgment. Then he turned and walked toward his car without looking back. Brenda shot me a venomous glare before following him. Within moments, their vehicle was disappearing down the long dirt road, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. I stood there holding my grandfather's flag, watching them go, and felt nothing but peace. The dust from my father's departure had barely settled when Admiral Chen appeared at my side. He stood beside me in companionable silence for a long moment, both of us watching the empty road where my family had vanished into the Texas afternoon. "Harold told me this might be difficult for you," he said finally, his voice gentle with understanding. "He worried about putting you in the middle of all this ugliness, but he trusted you to handle it. He said you had the steadiest hands of anyone he'd ever known, including himself." I smiled despite the ache in my chest. He always gave me too much credit. "No," the Admiral shook his head firmly. "He gave you exactly the credit you deserved. I've read your service record, Commander. I know about the fire aboard the Nimitz when you were just a lieutenant. I know about the helicopter crash on the Fitzgerald where you pulled that young sailor from the wreckage. I know about the typhoon relief operations where you coordinated supply drops that saved thousands of lives." He turned to face me, his weathered features softening with genuine warmth. "Harold didn't just love you because you were his granddaughter. He respected you because you earned it. That's a rare combination." Captain Hendricks approached and saluted crisply. "Admiral, the formation is prepared to depart unless there's anything further required." Admiral Chen looked at me questioningly. "Commander, any final instructions?" I considered the question carefully. These sailors had traveled here to honor my grandfather, to ensure his final wishes were carried out with the dignity he deserved. They had given their time and their presence to a man most of them had never met, simply because he had served and because service mattered. "Please extend my gratitude to everyone who came today," I said. "My grandfather would have been honored by your presence. I know I am." Captain Hendricks smiled, the first genuine warmth I had seen from him all afternoon. "Commander, it was our privilege. Your grandfather was a legend in the surface warfare community. The stories about him are still told at Annapolis. We were honored to be here." He saluted again, and I returned it with the precision that 15 years of service had ingrained in me. Then he turned and walked back to the formation, calling out orders that sent the sailors moving in coordinated precision toward their vehicles. One by one, the black SUVs departed down the dusty ranch road, until only Admiral Chen's vehicle remained in the circular drive. "Walk with me," the Admiral asked. I nodded, and together we began a slow circuit of the ranch yard. The late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and amber, and the horses in the far pasture had emerged from the shade to graze in the cooling air. A gentle breeze carried the scent of hay and wildflowers, and somewhere in the distance, a mockingbird was singing its evening song. "Harold used to write to me about you," Admiral Chen said as we walked past the barn where I had learned to ride all those years ago. "Every letter, every email, you were the main topic. Your promotions, your achievements, the challenges you faced and overcame. He kept me better informed about your career than my own staff sometimes." He chuckled softly at the memory. "I think he was trying to make sure that if anything ever happened to him, you would have advocates in high places, people who knew your worth." "He was always thinking ahead," I murmured, running my hand along the weathered wood of the barn door. The Admiral paused beside the corral fence, resting his arms on the top rail and gazing out at the pastures stretching toward the horizon. "He also told me about the family troubles, about your father's indifference and your aunt's greed. He carried a lot of guilt about that, you know. Blamed himself for not being around more when your father was growing up. That wasn't his fault. Dad made his own choices." "I know, but Harold was a man who took responsibility seriously, sometimes for things that weren't his to carry." Admiral Chen turned to look at me directly, his eyes kind but serious. "He wanted me to tell you something if things went the way he expected today. He said you should feel free to let go of any guilt you might carry about the family, about not being able to fix what was broken. He said some things can't be repaired, only released." I felt tears threatening again, the first since the flag ceremony. He knew me too well. "He did." The Admiral reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small envelope, slightly creased from being carried close to his heart. "He also asked me to give you this, separately from the will. He said it was personal, just between the two of you." I took the envelope with trembling hands. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, the letters slightly shaky from illness, but still unmistakably his. I pressed my thumb against the paper, feeling the weight of his final words waiting inside. "Thank you, Admiral, for everything you've done today, for being his friend all these years." It was the least I could do for an old shipmate. He straightened and offered his hand. "Commander Mercer, your grandfather was one of the finest men I ever served with. I can see that his legacy is in excellent hands." I shook his hand firmly, the way Grandpa had taught me. "Fair winds and following seas, Admiral." He smiled at the traditional Navy farewell. "Fair winds and following seas, Commander. If you ever need anything, you know how to reach me." I watched him walk to his vehicle with the measured stride of a man who had spent his life in service. The SUV disappeared down the same road my family had taken, though toward a very different destination. Then I was alone on the ranch for the first time, the silence settling around me like a comfortable blanket. Miguel and the other ranch hands had gathered near the bunkhouse, giving me space while making it clear they were available if needed. I walked over to them, still carrying Grandpa's flag, still holding the unopened envelope. "Miss Ellie," Miguel said, removing his worn hat in a gesture of respect that made my heart clench. "We wanted you to know that we're staying on if you'll have us. This ranch was Mr. Harold's life. We'd like to help you keep it going if that's what you're planning." I looked at these men who had been more loyal to my grandfather than his own blood. They had worked this land alongside him for years, had shared meals and stories and the quiet satisfaction of honest labor. They were as much a part of his legacy as the buildings and horses. "I would be honored to have you stay," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Grandpa trusted you. That's all the recommendation I need." Miguel smiled, deep lines crinkling around his eyes. "He talked about you all the time, you know, showed us pictures from your deployments, told us stories about your ship. He was so proud of you, Miss Ellie, prouder than I've ever seen a man be of anyone." The tears came then, streaming down my cheeks unchecked. I didn't try to stop them. "Thank you, Miguel, for taking care of him when I couldn't be here." It was our honor, Miss Ellie. He was family to us. I nodded, turned, and walked toward the ranch house, toward the porch Grandpa had built with his own hands 40 years ago. Inside, late afternoon light slanted through windows, illuminating the naval memorabilia covering the walls. I placed the flag on the mantel, beside his portrait. Then I sat in his worn armchair and opened the envelope. My dearest Ellie, if you're reading this, everything went according to plan. I'm sorry I couldn't see Victoria's face. Leaving you the ranch wasn't about punishing the others. It was about trusting the one person who understood what this place means. It's not about money. It's about what we built here together, in quiet moments on the porch watching the sun go down. Take care of the horses. Take care of Miguel and the boys. Take care of yourself. You've spent your whole life caring for others. It's time someone cared for you. I'm proud of you, Ellie. Prouder than words can say. You became everything I hoped and more. You got your courage from your grandmother. She would have loved you just as much as I do. Fair winds and following seas, my granddaughter. Until we meet again. All my love. Grandpa. I pressed the letter and compass to my heart as the sun set outside, painting the sky in shades of gold. They had seen the uniform today. They had finally understood. But Grandpa had seen me long before I ever wore it. He saw me when no one else would look. I'll take care of it, Grandpa, I whispered. I'll take care of all of it.